Imagine a world waiting in silence, no prophet's voice, no fire from heaven, just centuries of stillness, from the final echo of Malachi to the first cry of John the Baptist. 400 years pass, and heaven doesn't speak. But silence doesn't mean absence. Behind the curtain of history, God was writing a masterpiece. Kingdoms would rise and fall, cultures would clash. And in the shadows of empires, roads would be built, languages would unite, and hearts would hunger for hope. This wasn't a pause. This was preparation. Because when God finally spoke again, it wasn't with thunder, it was with a whisper in a manger, and nothing would ever be the same. In the waiting room of history, even silence grew sacred. To immerse you in this silence, imagine a young scribe named Eliab. He lives in Jerusalem in 300 BC, tending the scrolls in a quiet corner of the temple courts. Day after day, he recites Malachi's final words, "Lest I come and strike the earth with a curse." No new scrolls arrive, no prophet stirs the air. He watches travelers debate in Greek, Roman traders pass by, and children ask when God will speak again. Eliab waits, not just for himself, but for all of Israel. The silence is heavy, but his hope is heavier still. The last prophet stands alone. Malachi stood at the temple steps, his voice echoing through the courtyards. "Behold, I will send my messenger," he declared, his eyes ablaze with urgency. The people listened, but their hearts were weary. Persia ruled, the temple stood, yet heaven seemed distant. Malachi's words were a closing door, and then nothing. Years turned into decades. Children grew up hearing the tales of Elijah and Moses, but no new prophet came. "Where is the Lord of our fathers?" Some whispered in longing, others drifted, their faith dulled by routine. But God was not silent, he was planning. The empire and the exiles echo. The Persian banners flew high as Jewish exiles returned home. Ezra had re-established the law, Nehemiah rebuilt the walls, and worship resumed. But Israel was not free. The Persians were tolerant, but distant. In the shadows of the temple, a spiritual stagnation settled in. Then, far in the west, a storm brewed. Young Alexander of Macedon, taught by Aristotle and driven by visions of glory, swept through the world like wildfire. By 332 BC, he stood at Jerusalem's gates. Legend says the high priest met him in white robes, showing him the book of Daniel. Alexander spared the city, intrigued. He would die young, but his dream, Hellenism, lived on. Greek art, philosophy, and language swept across the known world. Gymnasiums and theaters appeared even in Jerusalem. A new culture arrived, tempting a generation to forget the old paths. Greek became the language of trade, thought, and eventually the gospel. The struggle for the soul of Israel. In the century after Alexander, his empire shattered into factions. The Ptolemies ruled from Egypt, offering relative peace, but the Seleucids of Syria brought chaos. Enter Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He stormed into the temple, erected a statue of Zeus, and sacrificed swine upon the altar. The sacred place was defiled. Torah scrolls were burned, circumcision outlawed. It was not just war, it was a war on identity. But in the hills of Judea, a fire kindled. Mattathias, a priest, struck down a royal official. His sons, especially Judah, known as Maccabee, the Hammer, led a revolt. Guerrilla warfare erupted. Miraculously, they reclaimed the temple, purifying it in an 8-day rededication. Hanukkah was born. Hope had flickered to life. Later, Jesus would walk in Solomon's colonnade during Hanukkah, John 10:22-23, a silent nod to the legacy of those who fought to restore worship. Seeds of expectation. By 142 BC, Jewish independence bloomed under the Hasmoneans, but freedom came with infighting and corruption. Sectarian groups formed, each interpreting silence differently. The Pharisees, scribes of the law, clung tightly to oral tradition. The Sadducees, aristocrats of the temple, collaborated for power. The Essenes, disillusioned, fled to the desert, preserving scrolls in caves. The Zealots, eyes blazing with passion, sharpened daggers in hopes of rebellion. They all waited, each group shaped by silence, each group yearning. It was a waiting room of history. Something greater loomed. Roads, words, and diaspora Rome marched in. Pompey the Great entered Jerusalem in 63 BC, ending the dream of independence. Yet, with Roman conquest came roads, peace, Pax Romana, and order, and all unknowingly preparing for the message to come. Rome built roads for Caesar, but God would use them for Christ. Meanwhile, the Jewish people had spread far beyond Palestine. In Alexandria, Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, the Septuagint. It would become the Bible for millions and the source book for the apostles. Greek was spoken everywhere. Synagogues were planted across the empire. The gospel, when it came, would travel fast and be understood widely. God was setting up the world's stage. Whispers in the wilderness. God had not spoken with thunder. He had spoken in whispers, in history, in culture, in longing hearts. The world was aching for redemption. The oppressors had changed. Persia, Greece, Rome, but the cry remained the same. How long, O Lord? And then, in the dry hills near the Jordan, a wild man appeared. John, son of Zechariah, wrapped in camel's hair, cried out, "Prepare the way of the Lord." A man appears at dawn, standing waist-deep in the Jordan. His eyes are fierce. His voice shatters centuries. Farmers, soldiers, scholars, and sinners gather at the shore. His every word pierces the air like prophecy reborn. Some weep, some tremble. The silence cracked. The heavens stirred. The voice returned, not in a palace, but in the wilderness. The people flocked. The baptism waters churned. The word speaks. In Bethlehem, under Herod's paranoid gaze, a child was born. Not to kings, but to a virgin and her betrothed. Not in a palace, but among livestock. The word had become flesh. The silence had ended. God had not abandoned his people. He had been orchestrating their salvation. Every empire that rose and fell, every translation, every synagogue, every longing, it all led here. And heaven whispered no longer. Heaven sang. The word spoke. Not through scrolls, but through cries. Not in thunder, but through tears. When God seems silent, we often fear silence. We equate it with absence. But the 400 years between the Testaments prove otherwise. In silence, God was working, strategizing, setting the stage. And when the time was full, he came, not as a storm, but as a seed. When your prayers seem unanswered, remember, silence may be the sound of preparation. Behind the stillness, God is moving. When you hear nothing, God might be building everything. Trust the silence.